Welcome to Politics for the Culture. My name is Johnny Ray McKnight, your host, where we will talk about local politics in Western Mass and around the world with a sprinkle of culture. Today I'm here with Matt Szafranski. He's a lawyer, graduated from Uconn. He's also the editor-in-chief of Westernmass Politics and Insight. He's also the chair of Ward 6 Democratic Committee in my ward. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I know we've been talking about this show for a while, and I wanted you to come on, and we finally got into fruition, so I'm glad that you're here. I want to kind of just jump right into it. We have some exciting things happening in our area right now. Alex Morse, mayor of Holyoke, announced that he's running for Congress.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that had been swirling around for a number of months now. I wrote back in April that there were some serious conversations that he was having with people across the district. For those of you who may not be exactly sure what the boundaries of the Springfield's congressional district are, it's basically all of Hampden and Berkshire County, the western fringes of Franklin and Hampshire County, and like a little bit of southwestern Worcester County. So it's a big district. I mean, in Massachusetts terms.
They redistricted not too long ago, right?
Well, after the 2010 census, Massachusetts lost a congressional district, and we in Western Mass had 2 congressional districts, but they were kind of massively shaped. I mean, when they talk about gerrymandering, they often talk about it as like, trying to screw over one party or another. That wasn't so much the issue we had out here. It was gerrymandered so we could continue to have 2 congressional districts because you had Richard Neal for one and John Olver for another, who had
out in Amherst.
Amherst. But his district was. It is Amherst. It was all of Berkshire County. It was huge. It was sprawling.
Oh, wow.
So when they lost a congressional district, obviously we weren't growing nearly as fast in Western Mass as the eastern part of the state. But it was interesting what they did. Even though we and Central Mass sort of lost a congressional district, they kind of reconfigured it so the 4 western counties got divided between 2 congressional districts, and you got Amherst and Northampton now in Jim McGovern's district. Jim McGovern, a Worcester Democrat. Very liberal, very progressive, and I'm sure he's thrilled to have Northampton and Amherst in his district. And I'm sure that to a certain extent, whoever the congressman is in Massachusetts, whether it's Neal or whoever his successor might be, is probably okay with not having that in the district either, because it kind of creates a little bit more homogeneity of political orientation by not having such activist communities in the district itself.
High voter turnout too.
Right. It can distort, where the actual center of gravity is, because of poorer turnout in the poorer cities.
Yeah, you're right about that. So when I was hearing about Alex, because it was like rumors, I think first person to report it was Politico, right? And people were talking about it, and first person that came into my mind that would actually run one day for that seat, if he retired. I thought, Congressman Neal would retire and then, Eric Lesser, somebody like, Eric Lesser will run. But, Alex, surprised us,
Well, I mean, I think that, if Neal were retiring this cycle, for example, you could almost assure that Morse would have run.
Yeah.
And I think it's a decent bet that Lesser would have as well.
Would have ran also.
And there is a theory that, and I've written about this too, that if you're Alex Morse, you might think maybe it might be a better bet to try to see if there is a path to going up against Neal than in an open race where there won't be nearly the same level of pushback because you're challenging an incumbent. But I think Lesser probably would be able to raise more money than Morse, and Lesser represents more people as a state senator in the district than Morse does as the mayor of Holyoke. So I think there was some calculation on his part. And also, I mean, there's not a whole, if you are ambitious and want to be politically upwardly mobile, your options aren't very many. I mean, running for state senate, because that seats the Holyoke State Senate is probably going to come up next year, is kind of a step down because you lose the power over money that a mayor has in Massachusetts. And Holyoke is a big enough budget that means something.
Yeah.
That's $132 million that you basically can do whatever you want with. But even if you can control a small part of that, that's a lot of influence. And if there was a Democratic governor, for example, he could be an obvious candidate for a cabinet position, but there's not.
Yeah.
So Charlie Baker's not going to appoint him to anything. Charlie Baker.
Wait, he might, no?
Well, yeah, I don't.
No.
See, I think Alex is smart enough to know that would be a political death sentence.
Yeah, that would.
Because I don't think it's probably controversial for a lot of people that will be listening to this podcast. But Charlie Baker's administration is not a place where careers are going to be made except for his.
Yeah. That's it.
Or if you're so young that this is just the first step, and Daddy has a lot of donations.
Well, we've seen this matchup before. AOC.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think first of all, a better comparison to start would be Ayanna Pressley up against Mike Capuano in Boston.
Comparison, yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because AOC did not have any electoral experience herself. She had not run for office.
Because Ayanna was a city council woman, so yeah.
Right. So I think that there's that parallel. The difference is that the population here is so much more static than it is in those districts. I think I assumed that Capuano was going to win last year, and it was really kind of silly of me to think that because I've lived in that district when I was in college. I went to Boston University for undergrad, and the whole area is always in flux, not just with students now, but with people who moved to Boston and work for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then move on somewhere else. So even though Mike Capuano was the congressman for 20 years, he was essentially no better than a sophomore rep because most people just didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
Compare that to here and in Springfield, and particularly whether you live in Springfield or your parents live in Springfield, now you live in the suburbs, you've known who Richie Neal is for a long time.
For a long time. He was the mayor and
city councilor before that.
So he's been around. He's entrenched in this neighborhood. See, my thing is, when you look outside of Springfield, or in Agawam, you have basically one Democrat in Agawam. There's not many Democrats in Agawam. Westfield, feels like it's more Republican over there. It's just where is Alex going to get his, diehard, Democrats? Because, when you look at the results, it seems like Richie Neal, he has a lot of the Democrats,
in Springfield
and Chicopee.
And then they're 1/5 of the Democratic primary vote in the district, just those two cities.
So I don't see it. Maybe I'm sure that he has a reason for running. I'm sure that he just didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to run for
this is long planned. I'm sure.
So this I'm sure he planned it out, but I do not see it. And a lot of people talk about too in politics. We're going to turn out voters. It's just very, very hard to turn out voters.
If you talk...
Especially around in Springfield, too.
Right.
It ain't Holyoke, I would say.
If you talk to people that are close to Morse, what they'll say is that he did do that when he was running for mayor. I think the counter-argument to that is that it's a lot easier to do that in a city of 40,000 than it is in a congressional district of 720,000 people. So, even if not nearly all of those people are going to vote in the election, it's just such a sprawling mass that you have to reach. And, you might have had people that knocked on the doors in Holyoke, 2, 3, 4 times, but it's still small enough that there's a good chance that Alex himself could have knocked on many of those doors, It's
like basically one or two of our wards,
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
you're right. It's a good comparison.
But the thing is, I used to work in Holyoke, and I do know Alex, I know of him. We haven't had many conversations. But I feel like Holyoke is a close-knit community, everybody knows everybody, so you can kind of get a core, and that core can turn out a lot of people, because it's only 40,000. In Springfield, it's a city. Third largest city in Massachusetts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the comparison, part of it is just that Holyoke has changed a little bit. It has maintained its urban politics kind of roots.
Yeah.
The coalition building, the sucking it up with people you can't stand. That kind of stuff. And Springfield has that too. But the problem is that I think the establishment was much more. Here was much more successful at keeping everybody that it didn't trust out, and as a result, it's very hard for somebody to get in, and also it's expensive to get in. I mean, Alex went into that race with connections to a sitting U.S. congressman who was able to help him raise money. So he was able to go in and basically swamp anybody.
Pluto.
Yeah, against Pluto, who just I don't know the woman. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but she was a sitting duck to a certain extent because she was going to be coming at with somebody who knew how to organize or knew how to get people to organize and had money.
Yeah. So
that is not as easily comparable in Springfield. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And I think I also think that it's important to know, I think a lot of liberals assume that Neil is just, a stuffy old dinosaur. He's going to have a ground game too.
Oh, he's going to have a ground game.
He's already started staffing up.
Yeah.
I mean,
he already started? Because I know Kareem is out there heavy.
Well, I think Kareem, who you're talking about, I think he's still in the staff side.
Okay, he's on the staff side.
So,
but you're talking about the campaign side.
The campaign side, yes.
Has to be totally separate.
Right.
But
campaign finance reports indicate that Neil is staffing up. So it's and you know what? I'm sure even though Tahiro, I'm told, Waduda ran against him last year, wasn't for a number of reasons, was not the kind of threat that he would really have to sweat. I think he also, and I don't mean there's any disrespect to her, it was just the circumstances of the race. But I think he also is like, well, I'm not taking any chances again. Because he knew somebody like Morse was going to be coming, somebody like Morse or Morse himself was going to be coming down the pike. So.
Yeah. Shout out to Tahira because, she definitely went against it. She gave it all she had, so I commend her for, that run that she had. But yeah, Morse is a different type of candidate. He is definitely coming in this from a position of power. So I mean,
from a sitting office,
sometimes people run and they're not in the office. They don't have a platform, So he definitely has something, to gain, and to lose. But let's move on. Next topic is the Springfield Ward 4 primary. That's a hot one here in Springfield. I mean, everybody. It's almost like the Democratic, primary for the presidential.
It's not crazy.
I mean, it's a lot. Literally every week I was like, okay, so that person got in. Then it was another person. I mean, they're all fighting for this seat. Henry Twiggs. He was a counselor for many, many years,
Ward representation was one of the things that he had long sought, and he held one of the ward seats. It will have been a decade.
Yeah. I was talking to Mike earlier, and he said that he's been in office for a decade.
Well, right, because in 2009 was the year that ward representation began,
yes, 2019.
And the counselors in wards 2, 3, 4, and 7 have been the same ever since ward representation began. So that's Councilor Michael Fenton, Melvin Edwards, Henry Twiggs, and Tim Allen. But now that Twiggs is retiring. Interesting, just pure data point as well, and for people who are trivia fans or, they're the Twiggs, along with Ken Shea, are the only counselors since ward representation began that have voluntarily given up their seat after serving a full term. So people have been hanging on to them for an extended period. So
they've been hanging on for a long time. But Henry Twiggs, he's definitely made some great contributions to Springfield, especially in the African American community. The Ward 4 sits in Mason Square, around that area. So definitely it's going to be a race to watch. But just so we know, everybody knows on this podcast, we got Marlo Brown. He is
Bud Williams'
assistant.
So I mean, I don't mean to trash anybody, but every state rep gets an assistant. The title he's been said is like chief of staff. I mean, people can call themselves whatever they want. Every state rep gets an assistant.
Okay.
If you're tight with the speaker, you might get a second person. Then you could actually have a chief of staff.
Because
then there's a staff.
Yeah, there's.
So
Right.
I mean, I don't know. But
so he's the chief of staff. He's the chief of staff. All right,
yes,
all right.
yes.
He's the chief of staff.
He's the chief of himself.
Lorenzo Gaines. Yeah, Lorenzo. He's been around.
Yeah, I mean,
he's been around.
Lorenzo's an interesting, kind of position because it's like on the one hand, I don't want to call him a perennial candidate because that's an insult, but he has run for a lot of offices.
Okay.
But at the same time, he's also kind of ingratiated himself into various political situations. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, because generally when I think of a perennial candidate, I think of a crank. Somebody who's not connected with anybody, who just won't give up the ghost.
Yeah.
It's like they're not accepting the fact that nobody's going to elect you to anything.
Vote for you.
Unless, of course, a sitting city councilor gets elected to Congress, and then Althea Garrison becomes a Boston city councilor. Google Althea Garrison; it'll be worth your time.
Definitely gonna Google it.
But so yeah, I mean, he's that's why I don't want to use a phrase like perennial candidate because it is a complicated situation, And then of course there's Janae McDonald who ran 2 years ago.
Yeah.
She ran at large 2 years ago.
Yes.
But I mean, this is probably award seats probably a little bit more. I don't want to say that it is. I think it's a good opportunity for her to. Because it's a smaller group of people you have to reach out to. But she has a lot of a presence in the community. First time I ever met her, she was actually like managing like a police community relations meeting, and doing a really good job at it. Just kind of smoothing over the edges of what is obviously a tense situation.
Very tense sometimes.
And George Savage, I have to say I don't know as much about. I actually thought there could have almost swore there were more than 4 people in the race.
I think there is another one. He's ran before. What's his name? I forgot his name. It'll come to me. But
forgiveness, please, if we're forgetting you.
There's a lot. Lawson.
Oh, Larry Lawson. Now he's a perennial. I will not have any regret calling him a perennial candidate.
Larry Lawson, but I've heard he's done some really good stuff in the community,
He may very well have, but I mean, it doesn't mean a damn thing to voters. Apparently, he's
gotten some votes, though.
Okay, let me rephrase that. It doesn't mean anything to a majority of voters.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And
he's got some votes. He's probably up to about 500.
Well, I don't know. It depends on the race. I mean, he's run for state rep, half dozen times. He's run for, city council. Yeah. It's mostly been state rep or city council, because before ward representation, you needed to get 200 signatures to get on the ballot for city council. Wow. And then when they created ward representation, they lowered it to 100 for everybody. Yeah. So it's actually extremely easy to get on the ballot at large, but not everybody does. So although 100 isn't really high anyway. So
100 is not high. 500 is a challenge.
But Linda O'Connell, who's running for mayor, and I think we're going to discuss that a little bit later.
That,
She was able to get them in 4 or 5 days.
4 or 5 days. That was impressive.
Yeah.
That was very impressive.
But it also goes to show you how not difficult it is to get on the ballot. In some countries, you actually have to pay a deposit to get in, and if you get in England. Another one to Google for you, Lord Buckethead.
Lord Buckethead.
So,
are you being serious?
I am being 100%
Buckethead?
Lord Buckethead. Okay, so this has nothing to do with Springfield, so I apologize, but it is culture a little bit.
Okay,
so.
All right.
So, the outgoing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, by the time you are hearing this, she probably won't be Prime Minister anymore, Theresa May, when she was re-elected. So in England, when they elect all their members of Parliament, everybody stands on a stage, all the candidates stand on the stage, and they announce the winner. And whoever the actor is who plays this Lord Buckethead filed to run in Maidenhead, which is Theresa May's constituency. So he was at the polling place with her, and there are pictures of the sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom standing next to a guy with a cross between Darth Vader and a bucket costume on. And this character has run against conservative prime ministers before, including Margaret Thatcher and John Major. So, like I said, Google Lord Buckethead. It will also be worth your time. As for the race itself, I'm inclined to think, and again, no disrespect to the other candidates in the race, but I'm inclined to think that Janae McDonald and Malo Brown probably have the best shot at the preliminary.
Preliminary.
They have the name recognition, they have the resources behind them, and that's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some idea, some sense that the McKnight Council may make an endorsement, for example, or not actually. I don't know if it's the McKnight Council. Might be like a subgroup that can do it outside their nonprofit status or however that works. But so
if you go around in that ward, you will see a lot. I mean, a lot of Lorenzo Gang signs. I don't know if that translates into votes.
Well, we don't know if they're all been put there by the candidate. Well, no, I mean, I don't. And again, I'll give you an example. This guy Bob Collymore, who ran for city council in Ward 6, he totally did not have the permission of every owner of where he put lawn signs.
They told me that he would put them in like abandoned homes, like lots.
Also, like right on the property line.
Wow.
So. Like I said, again,
Bob is not running this time around.
He took out papers.
But he didn't get it submitted, I don't think. Well, wow. So let's move on to the mayor's race. Linda O'Connell, as you mentioned, and then we have another young woman, Yolanda
Cancel.
She's running against Mayor Sarno. Okay. But no, there's another one.
Jeffrey Donnelly. Now there's another perennial candidate.
Yes. I would have to say that.
I don't recommend Googling him.
No, don't Google it.
It's not worth your time.
Not worth it. So what are your thoughts on that race?
Well, it's hard to completely know. I mean, the advantage to having a preliminary is you actually kind of get a...
gauge there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 years ago... in the mayoral primary, we kind of saw how really strong the mayor was and everything, but also turnout was really, really low. I mean, who knows you figure another 5,000 people voted 4 years ago, the numbers changed dramatically. So, I'm inclined to think that, I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that Mayor Sarno will survive the preliminary.
Yeah.
Although it's hilarious to imagine that he might not, but it's not going to happen. And then I don't think it's controversial to say that Jeffrey Donnelly probably won't survive the preliminary. So it's going to come down to either Linda or Yolanda going into the general. And at this stage in the game, it's. I don't remember, in my personal knowledge, the last time there was a serious jostling for the second place. I mean, there was a contested preliminary 4 years ago, but I guess you were a candidate in that race.
I was.
But the thing is that none of the candidates had the opportunity to develop the campaign such that they were really competing against each other for that second spot. It
was never against the mayor.
Right.
Yeah.
And truthfully, the numbers were so close that it could, Sal Sarcosta survived. It could have just as easily been somebody else. It was, somebody got out of bed that day in each of the wards, and history could have changed.
Definitely could have.
So that's not the case this time around. So, and also, but like you mentioned, it's a good point that, Yolanda and Linda also aren't really running against each other. So
they're actually really running against the mayor.
Right. So that creates a lot of, I don't know if doubt is the right word, but it clouds the situation a little bit in terms of like trying to guess where things are. I mean, you can look at campaign finance reports in that sense. Linda has raised more money than Yolanda.
What's the numbers?
The
numbers off the head?
I believe that as of the report in the middle of this month, Linda had about $6,000 raised.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Yolanda had under $2,000. Now, they may have each had contributions since then because they're the way that the campaign finance reports are these days for mayor, it's almost like it gets updated continuously. Like the bi-weekly reports are just in case you just want it all in one place, and they both raised money since that report.
And how much did the mayor raise? I heard it was $76,000.
The mayor has $169,000. I don't know that he's raised
and
that
I think
much.
it was in one quarter.
He might have raised that much in one quarter. I don't think he's done that much fundraising in the last couple of months. I mean, he's definitely raised money, but it's not like, a princely sum relative to what he's already got.
You can guarantee that he's definitely going to do a fundraiser within a couple of weeks, just to pat his stats.
Right, absolutely.
Because he definitely doesn't need the money.
Well, here's this kind of goes down to if we want to kind of like move past the preliminary a little bit and think about what's really going to happen in the general election. Whether it's Linda or Yolanda, it kind of doesn't matter. Dominic is a decidedly old school politician. And sometimes that can be a compliment. And in some ways it is for him.
Yeah.
His ability to do retail politics is, he's easily one of the most talented people in that regard in the city. There's no denying that. However, there's also a decided lack of modernity in his campaign. I expect he will, TV time is dirt cheap in Springfield, so it's not a huge drain, but I expect that he will spend a lot of that money on going on TV. To what effect? How much is he really going to spend to pay a media analyst to say, well, actually you need to spend more money on Golden Girls on Hallmark Channel and less money on, The Greatest Loser, or if that's not even on TV anymore. I don't even know. I don't really watch TV so much.
So you're saying based on his demographics, the people that's going to turn out for him?
Well, I think he's, it's kind of like you're throwing, all the darts at once.
Yeah.
And, you might hit a few of the spaces on the dartboard, and if you go, and he'll probably spend most of it on broadcast, so most of the people that he's hoping to reach and most of his base will see it, but it's not really tactical. It's not really, in a different time it would have been, but in a different time there were only 3 networks.
So he's been demolishing his opponents, throughout the years. So do you think that it is possible that his base may just stay home?
I don't.
And be like, hey, you got this in the bag.
Well, that is okay. That's an interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I think there's some risk to that. The problem is that because the only way for Yolanda or Linda to win in November is to grow some of the electorate a little bit.
You know what I say about creating voters? It's very hard.
It is, but
very hard, especially in Springfield.
But if they can do it, if it starts to rev up a little bit, then the other side starts to rev up a little bit. We were talking about Holyoke before, and Holyoke has generally very high turnout now for municipal races, and that's because Morse generated a lot of enthusiasm and got people out, and then his opponents, in reaction, some of the people that might have stayed out in elections but were totally old school Holyoakers were like, well, no, I don't like the way things are going. So it kind of, it's a feedback loop. And I think the difference is, and this is certainly true in Holyoke, and I think this would be true in the mayor's case as well, is that how much is your side really getting channeled, organized, and facilitated in the way a modern campaign is run. I think a lot of there's just a bunch of pencils and papers with, maybe somebody under the age of 30 looking at Vote Builder a little bit, but, it's mostly done with people that, are still writing all the stuff out longhand. So, and then that's not efficient, that's not effective, and there's no excuse for it. He's got the money to do better than that.
Definitely has the money, yeah.
Well,
he is an old school politician. Not to go back to the congressional race that's going to be happening, but one of the rumors was that if Congressman Neal did retire, you would see Mayor Sarno, go for that position, because that's kind of how Neal got to that position.
Well,
under different circumstances, but it resembles that. Mayor of Springfield runs for that seat. Once it becomes open.
True. There's a couple of things. One is that Neal got the seat because for some reason a guy by the name of Ken Lemansky he was a state rep in Chicopee, and most people thought he was Eddie Boland's heir apparent, and he was until he wasn't, and somewhere along the line, he must have gotten out of favor with Eddie Boland, and Neil, who was always in good graces, got in better graces with him, and got word in enough time that Boland was going to be retiring. And Neil faced no opposition in the Democratic primary in 1988. So I find it very unlikely that that kind of orchestration could happen, least of all for Sarno's benefit, because if nothing else, the left would go crazy in that environment. I mean, I get where Alex is going with in his campaign and trying to run to Neil's left, but Neil is not he's not a right-winger. He's not a conservative Democrat. He's not a blue dog. He is a very solidly liberal Democrat. The idea that somebody like Sarno would succeed him would enrage so many people. And again, up against somebody like Lesser or Morse, I think, Sarno would be obliterated, because he'd actually be running against somebody who'd have money, who'd have organization, and wouldn't be afraid to hit him right between the eyes.
How about this scenario? He runs as a Republican.
Then he loses. This district is not going to... This district will... I don't want to say it will not elect a Republican. There was a time when Massachusetts would not elect a Republican to the Senate. That's not something we can assume anymore.
Don't assume it.
But between Springfield, some of its more well-to-do suburbs, Holyoke, East Hampton, and the Berkshires, which are almost sapphire blue at this point in state elections, you would have to be running as a Teddy Roosevelt Republican, or as Teddy Roosevelt, to win the district at this point. I mean, is it possible? Yeah. I mean, is there a path? Yeah. I mean, in a great Republican year with a Democratic president who just murdered somebody on the White House lawn, it's possible. Yeah. But in the current incarnation of that district, if Sarno did that, he might as well just, cut his own throat on the steps of City Hall.
Please don't do that.
Yes, don't do that.
All right, let's move on to the next topic, Democratic Ward Committees. I am the outreach coordinator for Ward 6, the one that you chair, and also the Springfield City Committee. So let's talk about that. What do they do?
Well, I think the first thing you have to... So they serve a number of purposes. I mean, one of the most basic purposes is they kind of are a backup electoral college when there are vacancies on certain partisan elections. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there's actually a provision in law which kind of, skips their role in occasion. But to give you an example, back in 1998, Anthony Schiavelli, I think his name was... I forget, it was William Schiavelli. He was a state rep from the south end of Springfield. Okay. He died after the primary. And there was a caucus of sorts among all the various ward committees that are in that state rep district. And that was how Cheryl Coakley Rivera, got nominated to be the candidate on the Democratic nomination, on the Democratic line. And because of how Democratic the district was, she won. Yeah. That process, I believe, still exists in limited circumstances. So that's one role that they have, like a truly legal role. Yeah. They also function as ways to elect delegates to the state convention, which then is a way of nominating people for statewide offices every 4 years, and for Senate's re-election. So, for example, next year, U.S. Senator Ed Markey is up. Yes. That's not a gubernatorial year, but because it's a statewide office, there will be a nominating convention. Delegates will be elected, and he has opponents this year, or that next year. And
but this year is issues.
This year is issues. Yes. This year's issues, and the caucus elects delegates to that as well. But next year, the delegates will actually have a role in deciding who shows up on the primary ballot the following September.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm familiar with the lack of engagement, with these committees. Why do you think that is? Why do you don't think that people get involved?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I mean, it's part of a broader. This is a national trend of the parties becoming weaker, with outside money groups having such a role. And you kind of saw this a little bit. I don't say this in any way to slander unions, but that's what unions always kind of did. They were always kind of like an outside, inherently organized role. And then corporations realized, oh, hey, we've got money to do this stuff too. Except the difference is that, you know, they had to hire people to, you know, pretend that they were activists as opposed to people who were actually in the union, you know, actually working for a living. So that's a part of it. And when you come to like cities like Springfield in particular, somewhere along the line, and I don't necessarily disagree with this because I don't think we would be well served to have partisan municipal elections. Virtually all municipal elections in Massachusetts became nonpartisan. So in another time, the ward committee was essential to making sure to choosing who the Democratic nominee for, you know, the aldermanic seat, or the 2 common council, or in some cases 3 common council seats that were in the other. There used to be a bicameral city council in Springfield, and so they played a big role in that. I mean, even though again it was probably tantamount to election in most cases, because at that time all of Springfield was really Democratic. I mean, there might have been a few Republicans here and there, but you know, it was pretty Democratic. So that was the role that they played for the most part. And when that went away in Springfield, it went away, I believe, in 1961 when the current charter was adopted. They kind of just started to atrophy. I mean, there were contested races to be on the committee, to be the committee within that shows up in the presidential primaries, you know, through the 80s, I'd say. But after a certain point, the political establishment started to break down. The value of these committees started to break down. I think that there was a class of leaders, you know, starting in the mid-90s, particularly, who were very centralizing in their authority, and that just kind of strangled off whatever power was left. I mean, our Ward 6 committee, and this isn't a reflection of the people who were still running it, but it was basically just, you know, being run by the same people that were showing up to the meeting all the time, and they weren't really doing anything. But that when Deval Patrick was running for governor, going back to E. Henry Twiggs, he was the city committee chair at the time. He said, you guys are out of compliance with the rules. The Ward 6 Democratic Committee is dead. He turns to a woman named Pat Carney, who she will be a member until the end of this year because she's moved, but turns to her and says, long live the Ward 6 Democratic Committee. And now that was partly to make sure that there was a properly organized caucus so that Deval Patrick delegates could be elected. But, you know, so I mean, it does serve an important role. I think there is still a way to get them to be useful if you can put enough energy and willpower into it. Candy Glazer in Longmeadow.
Oh yeah, Longmeadow has a great committee. She was the chair.
She was the chair. She
retired,
stepped down recently, but she's still very active in it. But she, you know, through sheer force of will, I mean, to a certain extent, got that to a full slate. I mean, and now Longmeadow is like that prototypical suburban community that's running to Democrats, you know, after decades as a Republican refuge. So, you know, it does matter, and I mean, and it was not inevitable that it would have happened like that in Longmeadow. I mean, maybe Trump would have made it happen anyway, but that was true in Longmeadow before that ever began.
But why should people get involved with these committees?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to experience politics. There are certainly ways to experience it outside the committee structure, and I'm not going to stand here and say that it's wrong to do it that way. But if your goal is if you want to help the Democratic Party and help it succeed, and in a place like Springfield where there's not really a risk of your state rep or state senator not being a Democrat, but it's a place to help bring together your friends and neighbors to maybe try to boost turnout or to connect with statewide campaigns. You know, it's a way. I mean, there are people. People who are active in our committee are known by people in Boston. You know, and I mean, I'm an aberration because I also write a blog. You know, but you know, even without that, there are active members on the Ward 6 committee. that Pat Carney, being an example, they know her name in Boston. They know her name in other big cities and among other activist groups, and that matters because they know that they could go to her and say, hey, can you knock doors for us? Or, hey, I want you to meet this candidate. Your support would be really important to me. And it would be because, when you've been there, other activists can be like, oh, yeah, it's interesting that that person's behind that person. So I think it really depends on what you want out of politics, who you're hoping to connect with, what you're hoping to do. If you want to get involved with a campaign, a ward or town committee is a good place to start because they will be many of the campaigns will be coming to you.
Speak, yeah.
So if you're a little bit more like in issues, if you're a little bit more in trying to bring on reform, it may not always be the best thing because, there's no sugarcoating. The Democratic Party has plenty of flaws in Massachusetts and nationwide. So sometimes you're not going to find that reform, or you're not going to find the reform to your satisfaction. So again, it really does depend on what you want out of your political activist experience.
Yeah. So, I thank you for coming on the show. This is the first episode, and you are our first guest. I really appreciate your contribution. Anything that you want to plug?
Just go on to Western Mass Politics and Insight. It's WMassP&I.com. You can also Google Western Mass Politics. I'm the first result. And, check out, we got some coverage coming up on the congressional race.
Yeah.
We're certainly going to be looking at the municipal race a lot more closely as we probably mostly get past the preliminary, but we're going to try to get onto all the subjects that were discussed today, and also just the machinations of what's going on in City Hall. I mean, they just elected a new city clerk.
I heard about that last night.
And there's some mistruths that are told about that process. I can assure you that I correct the record.
Definitely will. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.